Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject, 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Wasn't too long ago we did a show on an article we found in the AOPA's Flight Training Magazine, and we're doing another one today. This was an article written back in June of 2018, and I can't speak enough about how good this magazine is for student pilots, and that's a student at any phase in their career. We lean on this magazine for content, and you should too as a student pilot. But this episode is all about traffic pattern best practices. We've done a number of shows on pattern work and pattern at non-towered airports and other things. And I can think back all 7 or so years of my flying, I've always looked for the perfect pattern, like someone that would draw it out and tell me exactly what airspeed and a Cessna 172 to be flying and what to do. And the reality is there's a lot of technique to it, and everybody has differing opinions on gumps and C-gumps and all these other things you should do, from flows to checklists. And we're just going to talk through what we think are our best practices based on this article, throw in some of our own techniques and thoughts, and hopefully help you individually come up with what is actually the perfect pattern for you so that you can enter that pattern every time with a plan and have something ready to go that you know you're going to be successful in that pattern. Wally, any idea how many times you've flown the pattern?
That's an interesting thought. A lot. Around this airport, I know the houses. I know the houses that have the really cool swimming pool in the back. And there's actually houses around here that have 2 swimming pools in their backyard. They have a lap pool and then they have the play pool. Anyway, I'm getting off subject here, but a lot. I've been in the pattern a lot, and to say I've seen it all, I don't know, because every day is a new day. But let's just jump right in here. Again, this is 10 pattern for success, 10 tips for flying the traffic patterns. Number 1 is very, very near and dear to my heart, and it's really simple. The concept, when I say this, everybody's going to go, well, of course, but in practicality, maybe it doesn't always work out that way. And it says, number 1, use the checklist. And granted, on a lot of our airplanes, let's say we're in a fuel-injected Cessna 172. There's not a whole lot to the checklist. It may mention flaps, it may mention landing light, but other than that, there's not a whole lot else. There's no carburetor heat. There's no gear to put down. There are no cowl flaps. But as per the ACS says appropriate use of checklist. Okay, so you can't not do a checklist and it be called appropriate use of checklist. I know the ACS we think of as, which ACS is Airman Certification Standards. We think of that as the gold standard for check rides. But man, if you just take what the ACS has you do and apply it to your everyday flying, I think it's a real good start. So you got to use the checklist. Every time I fly my 757 or 767, our landing checklist has 3 items on them, and I haven't memorized, but I pull out the checklist and I read it. Okay, and the thing is, you're not going to maybe be in this 172 forever. At some point, you're going to be flying a Bonanza that has cowl flaps. It's got a prop control. It had, and the most important thing is it's got a landing gear that goes up and down. So
no question.
Getting used, get in the habit of using that checklist every time.
Number 2 is avoid distractions, and I think this is probably a little difficult in the GA world, just because a lot of the flying we do is either with an instructor we built rapport with, or if we pass a check ride and we fly with friends, we're trying to show off what we've got. We're talking. We probably don't follow a sterile cockpit rule like you maybe do in the airlines. and it's easy to get distracted. I don't know why I did, but last night I had a dream of flying an IMC with a CFI from this flight school, and I was just talking and sharing ideas, and he let me make some mistakes, and we got a little crooked, and I was really scared in this dream because there was complete IMC, and we were almost upside down because I wasn't keeping a sterile cockpit. I think it's important that we eliminate those distractions of all sorts, and sterile cockpit's the obvious one. Maybe not looking for two pools in the backyards when I take off tomorrow would be a good idea. But it's staying attentive to the task at hand and not getting distracted.
Yeah, I had a check ride just recently where it was a private pilot check ride, and it was very strange. About halfway through the check ride, the GPS failed, and he, we didn't need it. He knew where we were, and he called. We came back to the airport to stay in the pattern, but every time we were on downwind, his focus was trying to bring the GPS back to life. And as we were debriefing, I said, "Wow, at this point, why did you care?
Yep.
Why did you care about the GPS? I could look out the left window, and there was the runway. We never got more than a mile away from the airport. It's not like we needed the GPS, but he could not keep from staying." Keep from playing that GPS. He was going to bring it back to life and get it going again. And, in the meantime, missing some radio calls and that sort of thing because his focus was not where it needed to be.
Yeah, and in social media and all the phones we have and everything that pops up on our screens, as I'm getting distracted right now while we're recording on my screen, you got to make sure you block that stuff out and don't have those distractions.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 3 is fly a standard traffic pattern entry. Of course, this is for non-controlled airports basically, and we did a whole show on this several months ago that got a lot of very good comments from. Obviously, going into a controlled airport, air traffic control is going to tell you how to enter the traffic pattern, but flying a standard traffic pattern entry, and I'm going to add to this listening and fitting in with the other traffic that's in the traffic pattern. It's like you're the new guy. You're coming in to enter the traffic pattern. So play nice with those who are already there and enter the pattern appropriately, and don't cut anybody off.
Number 4 is coordinate your final turn. And I think as I am still a rookie pilot in the grand scheme of things, just below 500 hours, that I often, if I don't fly regularly, the winds might get the better of me. If I ride with someone else who's a fairly young pilot, I can always tell when the winds are getting them, and they don't have a plan so that they don't overshoot final, and maybe they turn a little late. And we all know that that's a really bad place to be in. We don't want to get slow when we're low to the ground like that and pull up and possibly stall that plane when we're 600-700 feet off the ground. So coordinate your final turn. Make sure you're prepared for it. Make sure that you have accounted for the winds. Look, half the practice maneuvers we do as primary students are just to help us fly the pattern safely, right? I mean, we learn how to make turns around a point. We learn how to do S-turns. We learn how to do slow flight. We learn how to do everything we're learning how to do. Most of it, if not all of it, is pattern work and slow and landing, of course. So have a plan for that final turn. Make sure you don't overshoot, and try and pull back to get the runway. It's dangerous.
Yeah. Number 5 is use the whole runway. Granted, we may be taking off on a 5,000-foot runway, and we only need 650 feet to take off. So what's the big deal about taking off 2,000 feet down the runway? Well, any runway behind you is no good. It's like fuel that's left in the fuel tank, and you might wish that you had at some point. So use the whole runway. It may take you an extra tenth. It may cost you a little bit extra money to taxi to the end of the runway, but use the whole runway. I know that was one thing that my father just harped on me. Don't ever take an intersection takeoff if you can avoid it. Now, you're going to go to some controlled airports that maybe that's their standard practice to use intersection departures. I know the bigger airports do it all the time, and that's just the way it is. I mean, of course, if you need the entire length of the runway, you can request that. You may be delayed a little bit, but if you need it, you need it.
I was going to say, I bet if you asked, they might approve it in every sense. And I think my flight instructor did a good job of making sure I always use the full runway, and it's changed my decision making some. I'll fly out to Brenham, and you're at the kind of the FBO there at Brenham, and to taxi all the way to the end of the runway to take off to the south. That's a long taxi, and there's probably a entry into the runway every 1,000 feet, maybe 5 or 6 of those entries around through there. Likewise, I probably don't need that whole thing, but I go down there every time and I use it, and I do it everywhere I go now. And like you said, it's 30 seconds that I'm going to be really glad I did it when I need a little bit of runway to board and make a decision of a no-go, for sure.
The other thing about using the entire runway is that there's something that's at the end of the runway, and it's some big numbers. And so, it's a nice thing to know that, hey, I think I'm going to depart on runway 17 today, and you go to the end of the runway, there's a big 17. You take off at an intersection and you don't see it. Now, you can make sure that you're pointing at about 170 degrees, but there have been major accidents from people taking off on runways where they thought they were on a different runway, and possibly this runway was closed, or it was a lot shorter than the runway they really thought they were on.
Number 6, keep it tight on downwind. This might be one that people want to debate, but it is keep it tight on downwind. I think in a twin, I fly further away, of course, but there's a pretty good balance on how far to be away. I think we said it in the non-towered episode that we would like to be within a half a mile. We definitely want to be within glide distance if we have any issue. You should always be able to make it back, but keep it tight on the downwind. I can't think of a reason why in a single engine aircraft you would get more than a mile away, and I think we talked about that quite a bit when Pat was on. It helps with the flow of traffic. It helps for people coming to enter. I have seen in a pattern before where people are flying different distances away from the airport. You got to make work what's going to work for you, but don't get too far away from the airport for sure.
And one thing that air traffic control will sometimes do, they will tell you to turn a 3-mile final. Well, what does 3 miles look like? That's kind of something that is an acquired skill. A brand new pilot may not be able to tell 3 miles. And a simple rule of thumb that I use is that in general, we're probably doing about 90 knots in the pattern. That's 1.5 miles a minute. So 3 miles would take you 2 minutes. A 2-mile final would be about 1 minute and 20 seconds, something like that. So just know at 90 knots you're doing 1.5 miles a minute. They say a 3-mile final. Hit your the end of the runway and go out for 2 minutes. Of course, that doesn't account for wind. You can factor in wind and all those things, but 1.5 miles a minute. And maintain your target airspeed. One of my things I used to say a lot on with especially with my instrument students was the key to a good landing is a good approach. The key to a good approach is good airspeed control. So maintain your airspeed. Fly the airplane at the speed that you want it to be. And one thing that we see with instrument applicants is, they may fly the approach at 90 knots. Well, a 172 isn't going to land at 90 knots. So there's the transition from the approach phase to the landing phase. Well, maybe you got to slow down 30 knots. So, come up with the airspeed that you want to fly, and own it, and fly that airspeed.
Yeah, this brings so many thoughts into my mind. I think the first real trip I took with passengers was to Brenham. The restaurant was still open, and I was going to take them out there, and I bounced twice, and I went around, and I can't imagine the amount of damage that a fast landing might have caused to that aircraft had I struck the prop. And I just don't think we as young pilots can decide we're going to land a little faster because we like to land a little faster. I mean, these aircraft aren't going to land if you're going, like you said, 90 knots. And no matter how much we push down on it, it ain't going to land. So learn, get your airspeeds right, understand what numbers you want to be at, and considering the winds indicated as what you're going to have and see and use, and that should work for you in any circumstance. You just might it might be a little slower over the ground, but know your speeds, maintain those speeds, and you will learn how to land like a champion. Number 8, this will help you with your speeds. Trim, trim, trim. I think it's one of those acquired things that takes time. We talk about it often, but if you can trim the aircraft in the pattern, man, it makes it a lot easier to fly the aircraft. The checklist usage is easier. The holding the center line or holding the downwind is easier. Everything you do is easier if you know how to trim that aircraft. So use the trim. Trim is for an airspeed. Find the airspeed you want on downwind with the power setting. Set it and let it fly the airplane for you. Trim on trim and trim.
Yeah, I would say pretty much any time I see somebody struggling with steep turns, more times than not, one of the major issues is they don't have the airplane in trim.
That's a lot of work that applicant's doing, for sure.
It is. Number 9, a pet peeve of mine: land on centerline. I joke with applicants all the time. I will say, as a taxpayer, you have paid for the entire runway, not just the left side. And I guess it's because people are sitting on the left side of the airplane that they tend to want to land to the left of centerline. But this was something that my father just preached and harped on with me. Put the nose wheel on the center line, the nose wheel on the center line. Or actually what he said is put the center line right between your legs, which is just a little bit off. But if you got 150 foot wide runway and you land on the center line, you've got 75 feet of protection on either side of you. If you're landing way left, you're just taking some of that protection away. So land on the center line. That's what it's there for.
I also think pilots, you have a tendency to go a little right or a little left. We all have that natural tendency. And I was probably a little left kind of a guy. But now that I am a little bit longer in my tenure as a pilot, I pick on people all the time that are taxiing off center line. They won't land on center line. They get off the center line once the aircraft has become stable on the ground. If they know they're going to turn left, they'll get halfway over. I just don't think any of that makes sense, because what it does is it makes it okay to not be on center line. And so you might get to a remote airport that only has 70 feet wide on the runway and a 25 foot wide taxiway. And if you get off center at all, you might be in the grass or mud or something worse.
Right.
So if you visually and mentally always think centerline, 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 the centerline's there to protect you. I have centerlines around my hangar so people know not to cross those centerlines so they don't catch a wingtip.
Right.
Centerline is king, and you should not ever exceed even inches off centerline. So keep that one top of mind and follow it both landing and taxiing. And then we talked about this. We've had many episodes. We'll have many more in the future. But use the radio, but be brief. Don't be cute. Don't be cocky. Use the radio. Make your calls. Report where you're at. Report your altitudes. But be brief. I think the one thing that I generally hear people missing sometimes in remote small airports without towers is saying the airport name. And that's dangerous because those frequencies are being used by more than one airport. And so if you don't say Navasota, Cessna 1234, I'm 1,000 feet AGL in a downwind for 17, then Hearn might think you're in the middle of the downwind for 17. So
Right.
Make sure you're calling out the airport name. Make sure people know where you're at. We've talked a little bit about it, like don't talk about the water tower or the football field or the little local attribute that you know about because you fly there all the time, because I might not know that if I'm coming in for a visit, and that might not give me reference to where you're really at.
Yeah, yeah. And as far as, one technique that we hear a lot of people use, they'll say the airport name at the beginning of the transmission and at the end of the transmission. I quite honestly, I don't know if that's in the AIM anywhere, but I do believe it's a very good technique, because a lot of times when you first hear the transmission, maybe your ears aren't in tune to listening, maybe the radio's loud, you're adjusting the volume or whatever, but when you hear Navasota traffic, Cherokee 123 Bravo X-ray, left downwind 17 Navasota, they really are here. It's somebody I need to be looking out for because I'm at Navasota.
All good stuff, all that should be used by everyone listening to make your own plan of attack, to make the pattern the best pattern you can make it, and to be safe and protect both yourself and all those other aircraft flying around you. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.